Welcome to the Catholic Midlife podcast, where we address the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. This is the time, my friends, for a deeper renewal of your Christian vocation. Come and enter into the freedom of Christ that allows you to be the person you were created to be, because there's an amazing, awesome, exciting next season of life waiting for you. Hello and welcome to the Catholic Midlife podcast. I'm Karen Herbert and I'm here with my fellow host, Curtis.
Hi, Karen. Hi, everyone.
And here we are in the middle of our Thought Traps season. And hopefully you've connected with our first couple of episodes in this season. And we've got one that we really want to dig into today, a really significant thought trap.
Well, this is a big one. And speaking of big things, a listener told me recently that he sat down and listened to the entire season on suffering all at once in one sitting.
In one sitting? I'm not sure I could do that, actually.
Well, it was good, he said. So I guess he didn't suffer too much listening to it.
Excellent. I'll take that as encouragement. So perhaps you've remembered that we shared with you some cognitive distortions, some distorted ways of thinking over the last couple of episodes. And today we want to talk more about one in particular.
We're talking about the shoulds.
The shoulds.
And we've mentioned this in the last two episodes, but it bears further discussion.
It really does. It's so pervasive. We all pretty much have a case of the shoulds, and it can come up in myriad different ways.
So here's a bunch of examples. I should wake up early.
I should wake up early and I should go to the gym and work out. How about that?
And then when I go to work, I shouldn't work so much.
I should get more sleep, or maybe I should get out of bed because it's late.
Or, I shouldn't spend so much time on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Netflix,
you name
fill in
it.
the blank, you name it.
You name it.
Yeah.
Here's what I think we often say or feel to ourselves. I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't be so angry. I shouldn't be so sad. I shouldn't feel this way.
And of course, there's the big one. I think we all feel this. The world should be fair.
Well, it should. It really should. And things in my life should be fair also.
Well, that's right. And sometimes we say, my life shouldn't be like this.
Like it is. Exactly. How about strawberries should be cheaper than French fries? And that's not fair either. And if the world was fair, they would be.
You would get an extra order of strawberries with your Happy Meal.
Exactly. And I think the thing about the shoulds is it doesn't totally make sense to us, because most of us feel like really there are things that should be or shouldn't be. And there are things that we or others should do or shouldn't do, or should be like or shouldn't be like. So I'm not sure we all appreciate the fact that this really is a distorted way of thinking.
Yeah, when we're talking about all the things we should do, there's a distortion in there virtually always.
There is.
And let's get into that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay. So one of the things I think is underneath the should or the have to or the must statement, whatever it is we're telling ourselves, there's some kind of overly rigid rule inside your head. There's some kind of rigid expectation that usually you haven't carefully examined or may not know where it comes from, but it's dictating your own expectations of who you should be and what you should be doing.
A rigid expectation. So these get set up. We set them up, but we don't clearly define them. Or when we start to get into saying what we should do to meet that expectation, we're not necessarily setting, actual manageable steps to achieve it. So when we have this should statement, I should do X, it sounds like, oh, this is good. I'm setting a goal, but really you're not.
Really, you're not. It's kind of like a pseudo goal that's not really having any action behind it.
It's like a fake goal that kind of makes your unconscious happy. Like, ooh, I'm making progress because I know I should do X.
And one thing I've noticed is the expectations tend to be really black and white. So it's like you set up this expectation and you're always measuring yourself against it. And either you pass or you fail. And usually if you're having a should, you're failing. It's like this binary thing that pretty much always ends up in me failing.
Right, because from the get-go, when you're saying I should do X, well, there's an assumption there, hey, I'm not doing X already. I'm already not living up to my expectation. And so that's why I'm saying, well, I should go to the gym, but I'm not going to the gym. And it's because, well, I have this expectation that people like me, we go to the gym.
Right. It's no wonder that we all have these feelings of guilt and shame that come up with the must or the have to or the should, because really it's kind of implicitly in there. I'm not doing this thing. Therefore, there's something negative about me and what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's setting you up for failure. I mean, you already know you're not doing it. And then you're saying, well, I should go do it. But without more, you're going to keep repeating your pattern. I mean, you can have some willpower for a while and willpower through it, but that's going to peter out almost all the time. And then boom, there you go. You let down and you failed your should test.
I think that's a really important point, Curtis, that somehow we think saying should or must to ourselves, that's going to be motivating us. But it actually doesn't create real motivation. And it doesn't usually create change, at least not lasting change. Any motivation around it really comes with all the guilt and shame and carries a lot of avoidance. So like you're saying, if there's any motivation, it's pretty short-lived and it's not very powerful because it doesn't come from your values and your goals and your choices.
Well, one trap, I think, with all of this is maybe at an early age, we kind of learn that being shamed or guilted into something produces results. Or we see in other people, if we can kind of guilt them or shame them, we're going to get some short-term results. And we start to buy into this strategy of, hey, if I just sort of kick myself enough, then I'm going to accomplish all my goals. And the should is sort of a way of living out this pattern. But it's a pattern that doesn't serve us. It only serves us in a very short term.
Curtis, let me run something by you and see what you think about it. I'm thinking that when you're doing something from a should perspective or should motivation, you're not really making a free choice.
Well, that's kind of an interesting proposition because, of course, if I'm saying it, if I'm thinking it, I have a choice. So how is it not a free choice?
Well, just think of the difference between I should get up and work out tomorrow and saying something like, I've decided I'm going to get up and work out tomorrow, or I'm choosing to get up and work out tomorrow. I mean, first of all, there's a whole ton of different energy between those two things. And there's a different kind of motivation. In the second one, it seems to me like I've got some things I want to see happen, and I've got some things important to me. And it's part of my goals and objectives to get up in the morning and work out. And I'm deciding to do that versus this guilty kind of sense that I should be doing this thing that I'm not doing. And that means I've failed somehow.
Well, I think Catholic moral theology has a lot to say about this because when you're saying should, you're responding to some kind of imperative. It's out there. And you're judging how obedient you're being to that imperative. Am I doing a good job? Am I doing it well enough? Am I going hard enough at it? And, that's kind of fine up to a point. But when you're saying this other way, hey, I want to do this. I could do this. Look at what I could accomplish if I did this. You know what that is? That's the pursuit of excellence. And that's what virtue is, an opportunity, an invitation to excellence. Hey, if I'm going to the gym and I'm working out, I'm going to be in shape. And what are the possibilities that's going to create for me? What places could I hike to? Or what endurance could serve me? I can be more and better. So there's really this element of the should that it's tapping guilt or something like that. I don't want to be too dogmatic about it, but it's an obedience kind of obligation thing. Whereas when we're pursuing excellence, we're being invited to be all we could be, to be all that God has for us in potential.
Wow, I think that was really well said. And it makes me think of this quote I have from Rick Hansen. And I think he speaks to that. He says, it's really natural to have values, principles, and morals. But when the healthy inclinations become strict internal rules, shoulds, musts, gottas, then you have a problem. You either feel driven or righteous or like a failure.
I like what he says about all these kind of inclinations, these sources of the shoulds, the valuables, the values, the principles, the morals. It's sort of like Gulliver, and you're getting tied down by all these different imperatives, and they're starting to conflict. They're starting to have prioritization problems, and we don't like complexity in our life, and complexity makes us shut down. That's overwhelmed. That's not helpful.
One problem is all of these complex and layered senses of what we want to do, what we should be doing, what we could choose to do. A lot of times it's operating at the unconscious level and not the conscious level. So unless we really pull them up to the conscious level and take a look at them, it can be hard to make what we called a really free choice. And maybe I can think of an example here. Let's say your family of origin was very frugal, or you just didn't have a lot of money growing up. So you may have internalized certain ideas about what you should or shouldn't spend money on, or how much you should or shouldn't pay for something. And there's nothing wrong with being frugal or having some priorities and limits around money. However, you may authentically value other things in your persons. You may value beauty. And so you make a choice to be surrounded by beautiful things. And that may impact how you spend your money. You may value fun and excitement. And so you like to have adventures. And that might be something you choose. You may value generosity. And so you're choosing not to be frugal. And it's really important to pull up to the conscious level what your authentic values are so that you can make authentic choices that aren't dictated by all of these shoulds that you're carrying around.
I think that's a great example. And, there's a virtue angle to that as well, because being a spendthrift, that's very bad. But being generous, well, that's a virtue. But being cheap, I forget what the word for that is. There's a virtue, a vice word for being super cheap.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
And as you're trying to live in this generous way, some of those imperatives from growing up, which were probably very good for your family of origin, because that's how they were doing things, may not be helpful to you in your new mode of, hey, how am I going to be generous, in this case with money, in this particular situation?
Yes. So really, one really helpful thing is when you notice a should in your life, you can pull it up to the conscious level and you could start to just question it a little bit or challenge it a little bit around those questions, Curtis, like, is it serving you? Where did it come from? How is it helping you to choose what you want or undermining you in your ability to choose what you want?
Karen, say I'm standing here and I'm telling myself, I should be at a different place in my life. What kind of questions could I ask?
Well, let's see. You could ask, according to whom? Who says that you should be at a different place in life? Or
it's them, honey. It's them.
Them who? Specifically who?
They're out there.
Or why should you? What purpose would there be in you being at a different place in life? And what does different mean anyway? That's pretty vague. That could mean anything except what you now experience.
Why should I? If you're not going 110% maximum effort, then you're not doing anything, man. So you need to get going and make something of yourself. That's why.
Okay, well, those would be beliefs to pull to the surface and question as well. Who says you should be going at 110% or else you're not worth anything?
Yeah.
And your life doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And if you can name the expectation, maybe you can say, well, where did this come from? Do I think? What's behind it? Is this something I actually want? Or do I just have this vague sense that I have to be pursuing it? If you do want the thing, why? What's important about it? Why would you want to prioritize it? And if you really want the thing, then by all means, set a goal around that. I mean, here's another example. I should work less hours. Well, why do you want to work less hours? Is that a goal you're willing to commit to? If you discern that that's important to you and you want to take some action towards it, then you'll set it as a goal and work towards it rather than responding to some vague sense of should. And maybe you're choosing right now to work long hours for some particular purpose. And if you are, then you'll want to choose that, keeping this well-considered purpose in mind. Nobody is going to have the same goals and priorities and choices as everyone else. And your expectations, you want them to come from the goals and priorities you're choosing and not from all of these random places throughout your life that you've internalized unconsciously that you haven't examined.
Right, Karen. We have these unconscious rules.
Yeah.
They're useful. They're shortcuts. We can't make rules for how to respond to things on the fly all the time. But often they're not examined. And what happens when you start asking yourself these good questions, especially unimportant items like spending money or working less hours or health or how you spend your time, you start asking yourself these questions, like some of the questions you've offered, and your values start to surface. Often you can start to identify the values that you want to honor. And I'm just thinking of how many times when I'm struggling with questions like these, I'm having some values that are competing. And I have to decide, well, which one am I going to honor in this particular situation? Then all of a sudden, I am making a free and conscious choice. And the operative word isn't so much freedom like supermarket options, but the freedom to do the good, the freedom to step into what God has for me in that situation.
So I'd like to give our listeners just a couple of little tips. And I think, guys, this might help you just get started as you're reconsidering some of your shoulds. One thing you could do is when you hear yourself say a should or think it to yourself, you can change the should, change the word, and replace it with a could or a would. And what you'll find is it just starts to open up more choices and possibilities when you use those words. For example, if you hear yourself saying, I shouldn't spend so much time on social media, just pause and change that to, I could spend less time on social media if I choose to. And this way of thinking about it, the perspective is going to open up to you considering your options. Well, why would I like to spend less time on social media? What would the benefit be? Am I missing out on something that I want more of in my life? How could I get that? If I choose to spend less time on social media, well, what would that look like? Could I set a goal? What would I need to commit to or address if I want to reach that goal? And how can I keep my motivation high for making this happen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? You could really seriously consider how you want to change your approach to social media versus being stuck in this should loop where you just keep telling yourself, I should spend less time on social media, and then you feel guilty and ashamed and overwhelmed, and you're stuck in the loop.
Karen, I was noticing as you went through that example, you started off with, well, I shouldn't spend so much time on social media. That's almost like an avoidance goal. It's not really pointing you towards anything. It's just saying what you should be avoiding. But when you open it up to, well, I could spend less time, and you ask yourself questions like, well, why would I like to spend less time? What would the benefits be? Then it's starting to carry some suggestions of alternatives that you might take. It's a different energy, as you said, that's immediately moving you into more of a problem-solving mindset instead of this, I should do this.
Yeah. Yeah, you could almost say it's churning it into more of a purpose goal than an avoidance goal. Another thing you can do perhaps is simply remove the word should from your sentence. And this isn't always going to fit, but when it does, it kind of brings a lot of insight. So let's say you think to yourself, well, I really shouldn't be so disappointed. I don't know what's going on. If you remove the should part, it becomes, wow, I'm really disappointed. And it shifts you from fighting against this reality out there, and it shifts you more to a place of facing this reality that happened, because if you're disappointed, then you're disappointed. And before you can engage with your disappointment in a thoughtful and productive way, you have to accept what's going on and that you're disappointed.
That's a really great example. I like that. Just say, hey, I'm really disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have to say, and I hope this isn't a distraction, but this reminds me of conversations with my dad growing up, saying, son, I'm really disappointed in you. What I should have said is, Dad, you shouldn't be so disappointed.
Yeah, I'm wondering how well that would have gone over.
Yeah. Well, 50 years later, you think of the response.
Oh, very funny. Very funny. Well, once you can sort of accept and face that you're disappointed, then you can recognize where you're at and decide what's important to you, what you want. And that's where the real change comes from, in processing through emotions and decisions and choices.
We've been talking about ourselves, the I should statements, but there's a whole nother world of should statements, and it's the you should.
Oh,
or
ouch,
they
right.
should, especially people that we're close to. And just as the I should statements carry distortion, the you should statements pretty much are always going to have some distortions as well. And it's along the same lines.
So just like we might have these unconscious expectations for ourselves, it sounds like we also have them for other people. What they should do or things we feel they should live up to, and then probably judging them deficient if they don't measure up.
Yeah, instead we can tell them what we want or what we suggest or what we think is helpful, or so many other approaches besides simply telling them there's this standard we have for them and they should do X and that's it.
I think this could be another exercise that's really helpful, is not only paying attention to when we say these to ourselves, but paying attention to when we do this to other people. And I suspect some of those tips we mentioned could be helpful in the you should statements also. And also kind of interesting to notice the difference in response that we get from the other person. If we are shoulding on them, what do they respond with? What do they say? How do they respond emotionally? What's the effect or result of that? And does it actually get results? I'd be really curious about that.
Yes, indeed. So, Karen, we've been talking about the shoulds, and I think it's not always obvious immediately to people why the should signals a cognitive distortion, but I'm hopeful that our listeners are picking up on that and buying into the idea that the I should statement and probably the you should statements are a signal for taking a little perspective.
Yes. Yeah. And ultimately, we want to move from the I should to the I choose. I choose.
Well, my friends, far be it from me to tell you what you should do, but I have a strong suggestion for you. That is to email us your should stories.
Oh.
And email us at thecatholicmidlife@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your story, your perspective, and what's going on in your should world these days. So thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for being here with us. The Catholic Midlife Podcast is for anyone that wants to receive the abundance of life that God has for each one of us. Take a moment right now to tell a friend about us.